Hello and welcome to the Sunshine Cathedral. The Sunshine Cathedral is a different kind of church where the past is past and the future has infinite possibilities. And with that, we invite you to come and worship with us here on Sunday mornings at 9 and 10:30 a.m. at 1480 Southwest 9th Avenue. Now, I invite you to come in and worship with us here at the Sunshine Cathedral.
Our first reading today is from Deuteronomy. 6 days you may labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath. No work may be done then. In these human words, God's voice is heard.
Our second reading is from Deuteronomy. You shall not see your neighbor's ass or ox foundering on the road without showing concern about it. See to it that you help, lift it up. In these human words, God's voice is heard.
God is with you.
And also with you.
A reading from the Gospel according to Luke.
Glory to you, Christ.
Now Jesus was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath. And just then there appeared a woman with a spirit that had crippled her for 18 years. She was bent over and was quite unable to stand up straight. When Jesus saw her, he called her over and said, "Woman, you are set free from your ailment." When he laid his hands on her, immediately she stood up straight and began praising God. But the leader of the synagogue, indignant because Jesus had cured on the Sabbath, kept saying to the crowd, "There are 6 days on which work ought to be done. Come on those days and be cured, and not on the Sabbath day." But Jesus answered him and said, "You hypocrites! Does not each of you on the Sabbath untie your ox or donkey from the manger and lead it away to give it water? And ought not this woman, a daughter of Abraham and Sarah, whom misfortune bound for 18 long years, be set free from this bondage on the Sabbath day?" When he had said this, all his opponents were put to shame, and the entire crowd was rejoicing at all the wonderful things that he was doing. This is the gospel, the good news.
Well, tomorrow, August the 26th, is Women's Equality Day in the United States. It's the 93rd anniversary of women's right to vote being enshrined in the Constitution. Hasn't even been 100 years yet. And Wednesday, August the 28th, is the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. And these milestones actually fit nicely with our gospel passage today. These moments in history where people are lifted up, where people are reminded of their sacred value, where people are encouraged to hope when things seem hopeless. That is very much a gospel message. That is very much good news. And so this healing story we've heard today and these historic events that are marked this weekend, they all fit very nicely together. A wonderful bit of synchronicity. In Rodgers and Hammerstein's Carousel, there's a well-known song that begins, "When you walk through a storm, hold your head up high, and don't be afraid of the dark." Our service opened today with the legendary Mahalia Jackson singing that very song. That song from the musical Carousel. And I believe that we're going to be treated to another Rodgers and Hammerstein sacred tune later today. I get a sneak peek and know some things every once in a while. But here is Mahalia Jackson taking just an ordinary song, just something from the popular culture, and seeing the sacred in it and sharing that sacredness with others. And that's how we began today. When you walk through a storm, hold your head up high, and don't be afraid of the dark. And that is the message of Luke's gospel reading today. You see, Jesus' homeland had been occupied by various empires for a long time. Empire after empire, on their way to greater conquest. They would go through Palestine and through Jerusalem. And so, of course, they would collect the spoils on their way to what they considered greater conquest. And so Babylonian Empire and Egyptian Empire and the Persian Empire and the Greek Empire, with one empire after another for 4 centuries, had occupied Jesus' land. And then They had a little respite. They had a little bit of independence for about 100 years. There was a revolt, and they reclaimed their space, and they reclaimed their autonomy, and they were able to hold that for about 100 years. But then in 63, before the Common Era, BCE, Rome comes along, and they are conquered all over again. 400 of the last 500 years, they have been conquered, and after a bit of autonomy, they are reconquered by yet another empire. Now, about 92 years after Rome conquers the Jewish nation, Jesus is born. In those days, when he was born and before he was born and as he was growing up, there were guerrilla warfare attempts and self-proclaimed messiahs saying that they were the ones that God had raised up to defeat the oppressor and to break the yoke of oppression. And these zealots and these warriors and these guerrilla fighters and these messiahs, they all misjudged the power of Rome. And they tried to fight Rome with physical force. And they all lost, and they lost big. This was the world into which Jesus was born. This is the world that shaped Jesus' life and ministry. This was the world in which Jesus' life was brutally taken. This was the landscape that gave rise to apocalyptic dreams of heavenly armies toppling earthly oppressors and the world of empire being destroyed and replaced with a new world. All of those apocalyptic images that we see in a little bit in Matthew, a little bit in Luke, a lot in Revelation, those apocalyptic images of the world ending, it is the world of empire that they are wanting to end. They hope it will end and be replaced with a new world where they can be free again. This is the world of empire that Jesus is born into, lives in, is shaped by, ministers in, is killed in. That is the world that the Gospels come from. About 37 years after Jesus' execution, in 66 of the Common Era, there was once again a brief victory against Rome. Zealots, and that's not a pejorative term, that's what they called themselves. It was a party, the Zealot Party. Zealots liberated Jerusalem from Roman power for about 4 years. And then in 70 of the Common Era, 70 CE, say 70 CE, 70 CE, you'll never forget it now. In 70 CE, the Romans retaliated with great force, retaking the city, killing people en masse, and destroying the Holy Temple for the second time in its history. And the years that followed were filled with grief and despair. The land has been occupied by empire after empire. Someone that people thought was the great hope of liberation has been killed. The holy city itself has been destroyed and its temple with it. This is the world now when the gospel writers put pen to paper and begin writing these stories. Luke is encouraging an early third-generation Jesus movement that imagines Jesus as a great encourager, or at least Luke is trying to get them to imagine Jesus as a great encourager. In a world of despair and desperation and hopelessness, where people feel broken down and bent down and beat down, Luke wants people in the Jesus movement to imagine Jesus as an encourager of the downtrodden. And this is the context in which we hear today's gospel story. In the story, there is a woman who has been bent low by the difficulties of life. Her head hangs low, as happens when one has lost hope, when one feels overpowered and overwhelmed by poverty or sexism or racism or homophobia or illness or the ravages of war. She is so bent down and bent low that she is barely able to function and utterly incapable of looking up and looking out, unable to see that possibilities exist beyond the pain she has endured. She is bent low by the sorrows of life and can't imagine that there is something beyond her despair. But Jesus, the Jesus imagined by those late first century dramatists, Jesus sees with the eyes of faith. Jesus sees with the eyes of optimism. Jesus knows better than to judge by outward appearances. Jesus knows that the realm of experience can be full of BS, bad stuff. It's early yet. But he also knows that the presence of God is always at hand. And he knows that within us is a power that is greater than any appearance or experience in the world. So Jesus looks at this woman, and he doesn't see hopelessness. He doesn't see unalterable brokenness. He doesn't see a lost cause. He looks at this daughter of Abraham and Sarah, this child of God, and he sees possibility. He sees sacred value. He sees someone who is part of the creation that God calls very good. And if he can get her to see these same truths, if he can get her to look up and look out, if he can convey the message of the Psalter, I will lift up my eyes to the mountains. From where does my help come? My help comes from the mountain, from the power, the presence of God, from the creator of heaven and earth. Oh, if she can look up and look out, she will see so much more than one bent low ever could. And so Jesus affirms the woman's dignity. And that's what prophetic ministry is. It is the affirmation of human dignity. It is raising up those who have been pushed to the margins of society. It is recognizing that those who have been told they are not good, they are innately, because of their gender identity or their sexual orientation or their race or the amount of money their parents made or their ethnicity or their nationality, that somehow they should be other. Well, the prophetic word always says that in God's commonwealth, in God's kingdom, in God's realm, there is no other, that all are children of God, one parent, one human family. And so Jesus affirms the woman's dignity. Marriage equality affirms human dignity. The March on Washington affirmed human dignity. The 19th Amendment affirmed human dignity. Compassionate care for people with HIV and AIDS affirms human dignity. Access to housing, employment, education, food, and health care affirms human dignity. Jesus' healing power in the story is the power that is released when human dignity is affirmed. Now, when we talk about Jesus lifting up people and caring about people and loving people into wholeness and lifting them up, we don't need to confuse ourselves by thinking that he was somehow a doormat, that he's just one big hug wrapped up in clothes of antiquity. Jesus is part of this movement seeking independence. Jesus speaks truth to power. Jesus confronts powers of oppression. Jesus' weapon may not be swords and rocks and shields, but Jesus is very much a revolutionary. And so Jesus, though affirming the sacred value of all people, and especially of those who have had their dignity stripped from them, Jesus isn't a pushover. Jesus, because he's loving you, can't be manipulated into letting you then roll over others. When people tried to cause trouble in the blessed community, Jesus would rebuke them. He called Peter Satan. I don't remember him ever calling anyone else Satan, but his best friend Peter. But when Peter misbehaved, Peter got a rebuke. And he told him to get away from him. And when he saw the temple money changers lining their pockets and privileging the elite in what was meant to be the house of prayer for all kinds of people, he popped the top on a large can of asphalt. But he knew, even though he held people accountable for their behavior, he could balance radical inclusivity with accountability, because he knew that all people were the children of God, and he was especially moved by the have-nots of the world, of whom he was one. He wanted them to know that in spirit there is currency beyond coin. And in God's vision for the world, the first will be last and the last will be first, which isn't to say that people are knocked down or that those who don't deserve it will be raised up, but that in God's kingdom all are part and parcel of the one all. And so there isn't divisions of class and elitism and better and worse. And so to those who had been bent low by constant degradation or despair, he offered affirmation of their sacred value. He redeemed their image of themselves. He saved them from the hellish experience of hopelessness. He demonstrated what Eleanor Roosevelt so eloquently said, "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." Now, who knows why this woman had all but given up? Who knows if she had struggled through poverty after her husband died, or perhaps she had a son who had been one of the warriors against imperialism, and maybe he was killed in battle, or worse, captured and enslaved or crucified. Who knows what had bent this woman so low? But Jesus looked beyond her physical condition to the truth of her being, to the divinity within her which could not be weak nor weary, broken nor diseased. Jesus looked beyond her pain and saw her perfection. And so he says, "You are free of your ailment." You are free of your ailment. Now, she may still have symptoms. I'm not saying she went away from there and never had a back spasm again. But whatever her symptoms are, they can't define her anymore. They no longer have her permission to be the defining factors in her life. She may have a condition, but it need not have her. She may have been given a diagnosis, and she may have experienced some challenges, but in spite of the difficulties, she can be free. And indeed, in the realm of spirit, she is free. In ultimate reality, she is free. Conditions are not her truth. They are just fleeting experiences. Regardless of conditions, she is free. The Dalai Lama would call that freedom in exile. That no matter what is happening, we can experience the truth of freedom. And finally, Jesus touches her. But it wasn't magic conveyed through touch that healed her, because in consciousness, he touched her the minute he saw her sacred value. The minute he affirmed her goodness, the minute he declared her free, the healing was taking place, and then he touched her. The God who had been called and anointed, the God who had called and anointed him was no less present to her. And if Jesus can see that, he might be able to help her see it. And if she can see it, she can look up and look out and discover joy she had not known before. Life may not have instantly gotten easy for her, and her pain may not have completely disappeared, but she can understand it and respond to it all very differently now. Nothing can keep her bent down anymore. She can face the difficulty and stand tall with hope and grace. Now, there were the religious people. God help her. If you want a parade rained on, find some religious people. Now, I don't mean spiritual seekers. I don't mean those who are trying to follow the examples of Jesus and other helpers of humanity. I don't mean those who are trying to form a blessed community. I mean those who are bound by doctrine and dogma and tradition. The religionists can be joy suckers if allowed to be. But Jesus has just inoculated this woman against the disease of dysfunctional religion and filled her with the sacred serum of radical spirituality. The day of Sabbath rest was to help us restore our minds and bodies. The commandment came to people who had been enslaved, whose bodies had been worked and broken down with work, and they had escaped. But even in the escape, they were weary from their wandering. And the Sabbath rest was meant to revive people who were emotionally, spiritually, and physically exhausted. The Sabbath rest was meant to revive people. How ironic that Jesus follows the spirit of the law, but is criticized for not being bound to a literalist reading of it. While his critics want to argue about what the Sabbath should look like, Jesus simply gives Sabbath restoration to a woman in need. Luke's Jesus tells the woman to look up and look out, to hold her head up high, to face the challenges of life with hope and with an awareness of her sacred value. And Luke, through his literary Jesus, is telling his community the same thing. And today, that's what he's telling us as well. Hold your head up high. Lift up your eyes, look up and look out. Your good is at hand. And this is the good news. Amen. The problems that have weighed us down and bent us down and beat us down, I can't make them go away. But I can say with Jesus that we can be free in spite of all that. Lift up your head. Where comes our help? Our help comes from that omnipresent Spirit, that omnipresence in which we live and move and have our being, that presence of good that is always at hand. We can look up and look out and see the possibilities and continuously move toward them. We may fall down, but we can get back up. We may get pushed back, but we can push back forward. Life is full of ups and downs. And I just wish I had the magic to make it always be easy, for the doctor report to always be good, for the paycheck to always have a raise, for the person you would desperately want to love you, and then you not get sick of them after that. I wish I had the power, but nobody does. But what we each have the power to do is to face the difficulties and disappointment and know that that is an experience, not the truth of our being. That is a condition. That isn't who we are. And once we don't identify with the condition, we can move through it. Winston Churchill said, if you're going through hell, keep going. Lift up your head. Look up and look out, because it's all right there.
On the night you were betrayed, you took the bread. After giving thanks, you broke it and said, this is my body, open to you. And as you eat this, remember me.
This is my body, open to you. And as you eat this, remember me.
On the night you were betrayed, you held the cup. After giving thanks, you lifted it up. This is my life, poured out for you. And as you drink this, remember me. This is my life, poured out for you. And as you drink this, remember me. So we thank you for the wine and for the bread. We recall the life you lived and the truth that you spread. In God our Maker, oh heavenly dove, in Christ we celebrate your wondrous love. And God our Maker, oh heavenly dove, in Christ we celebrate your wondrous love.
Here at the Sunshine Cathedral, we practice an open communion. And what that means is you don't have to be a member of this church or any church to receive the sacrament. Just as you are, with whatever your beliefs or doubts may be, you are welcome to participate in this feast of unconditional love. My friends, these are the gifts of God for all the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Hello, I want to thank you for joining us for worship today here at the Sunshine Cathedral. Again, if you're ever in the Fort Lauderdale area, please stop by and worship with us on Sundays at 9 and 10:30 a.m. If you'd like to find out more about the Sunshine Cathedral, about our resources, or about our books published by our senior pastor, the Rev Dr Durrell Watkins, or if you'd like to make a donation to the Sunshine Cathedral, please visit us at www.sunshinecathedral.org. Until the next time, may God continue to richly bless you on your journey.
I have seen the light shining in the dark.